Okay, let's start now. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Hélène. I'm an infrastructure investment manager at GFI Europe. For those of you who may not be familiar with GFI, we are a global organization, a global think tank, supporting the alternative protein industry across the entire value chain. So from science to policy to industry engagement. The team I'm part of works closely with a wide range of corporate stakeholders, including investors, companies, retailers, distributors, and so on. Personally, I come from a corporate finance background with experience in investment banking and project finance in the solar industry. And I'm particularly passionate about innovative and ethical finance and about developing investment mechanisms that can support impactful change. So it's a pleasure being a part of this initiative, which we believe can help unlock some of the toughest challenges in the investment ecosystem for alternative proteins. So that being said, you all joined today's Novel Foods Framework webinar. So as you may all know, we'll be looking at different routes, possible pathways to introduce and commercialize a novel food product within the EU. Given the time we have today, we'll keep things fairly high level, but there will be plenty of time for more detailed, specific technical questions during the Q&A at the end. For those of you who have missed it, last October, InvestNL and Forward Food Law, in partnership with GFI Europe, released a framework designed to help investors and ventures navigate what can sometimes be a complex EU regulatory landscape. We'll share the link to the framework in the chat at some point. It's a great complement to today's session, and as always, we very much welcome feedback. Before we get officially started, just a few housekeeping items on my side. First, the webinar is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be shared with everyone who registered, and the session will also be available on our YouTube channel. And second, and importantly, please use the Q&A box to submit your questions rather than the chat. It really helps us keep track of them more easily. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the whole webinar, but we'll obviously be more likely to address them towards the end during the Q&A session. Okay, so it's now my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. We're joined today by Mathilde, Managing Director at Forward Food Law, and Muriel, Senior Business Development Manager at InvestNL. For the record, InvestNL reached out to us last year to collaborate on their second module of their investor framework series, and the partnership felt like a very natural fit. We obviously share many common interests, and we bring complementary expertise to across different aspects of the topic. So that's the story of how it all started. And with that, I'll hand it over to Miriam now to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you very much for those words and this introduction. So let me briefly explain who we are, why we set out to build this framework, and then give the word to Mathilde, who is the actual expert who can answer all of your questions. But we are InvestNL, the Dutch National Promotional Institution, meaning that we're set up to accelerate the different transitions the Netherlands is facing, with agri-food being one of the major ones. We focus on the one hand on regenerative agriculture, and the other, which is more relevant, of course, on the protein transition or the biotech transition. And we do this on the one hand by direct and indirect investments. So as you can see on the logos on the right side of the slide, we invest in all kinds of alternative protein companies, ranging from insect, algae, precision fermentation, cultured meat. And we can also do indirect investments, meaning that we can do fund investments, for example, on Assen or Pimwimic, if you think they are essential for the Dutch ecosystem. But I myself am part of the business development team. And what we do is we try to tackle barriers beyond funding, meaning that we can give knowledge, expertise, and market insights to tackle other challenges next to funding. And of course, novel food regulations is a big one here. If you go to the next slide. Yeah. So thanks, Between for the choir, of course, a little bit here, but novel foods are a major opportunity. We see new protein sources. They are potentially new protein sources. They are healthier. They are more sustainable, animal friendly, less carbon and nitrogen emissions, and of course, not to forget, they can be quite tasty as well. But if you want to sell in the EU, you have to apply by the regulations. And as a consumer, I can say I'm really happy with that because it provides some security for me. But also, the companies we work with are often quite innovative. And for innovative companies, it's also really important that consumers trust the product. And with these strict laws, consumers often trust new products. Um, and when you get EFSA approval, of course, you get access to a big single market, 27 countries instead of, you have to apply for once instead of 27 times. And the EU is seen as a golden ticket, so a benchmark to actually for other markets. So a lot of doors will open when you get this approval. But as you probably all know, there are some challenges as well. It can be really time consuming. EFSA approval can take years. It's really complex and, of course, really costly. In our framework, we have examples from up to 1 million, excluding time spent. What was really new for me is that interpretation can really differ. It seems to be a really straightforward subject, but there are a lot of gray areas. And what is really a challenge for smaller companies is that early action really helps. So start early, and that can be a challenge if you're a small company. And that's exactly why we started working on this framework. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. And what our goal was, we help companies and investors understand the EU novel food routes you can take. We've set up this framework with different routes, and then show you for each route which are the risks, what are the opportunities, what are relevant timelines, what are forms you have to fill in, organizations you have to deal with, to help you make supported decisions. And investment is in brackets there because we have also a focus on investors, which we want to showcase what is possible, what is realistic. And we do this to hopefully attract more investors instead of scaring them away. And what this does not do with the framework is it's not, every company is different. So there's no one size fits all. And it's no replacement for any legal advice. Yeah, there's no financial or investment advice in there. It's just your first step. Yeah, that's what we try to put in this framework. And then I'm giving the floor to Mathilde.
Thank you, Michael. Okay. So, hi everybody. Very happy to be here. So the way the presentation is going to be conducted is like at some point there will be a lot of text, but don't worry if you cannot read everything because you will get access to the presentation afterwards. And the slides are also formatted from the framework. So they are just like repetition of what is already written in the framework. So basically, when dealing with novel foods, many companies, they face the same type of challenges. We start by the fact that the definition of novel when it comes to food innovation is pretty clear. It's any food that has not been eaten in Europe before the 15th of May, 1997. But the definition doesn't apply word for word because there are some adjectives in the definition. For instance, eaten to a significant degree, that's open to interpretation. So it very much depends on the product you are dealing with. And some of the gray area in the novel foods concept mostly relates to fermented products. For instance, precision fermentation milk proteins are not the same as milk protein produced in a more conventional way. The same when you extract some component of food, might be novel, might not be novel. And also when you use new processes on non-ingredients, it can actually make the non-ingredients novel. One example that I have is UV treated wine has been deemed novel food, even though UV technology has been used on novel foods, and wine is obviously not a new food.
The fact that this technology is newly applied to a non-ingredient make it novel. And regulation is something that companies, in my experience, they prefer to leave at the end. But the earlier you address it, the better it is for you, because regulatory consequences are that the earlier you act, then the more power you have to reframe your regulatory strategy in terms of time to market, the capital needed as well, and the investment risk that you have to explain to your potential investors. And the way we also design the framework is based on strategic insight that we got from experts and also companies that we interviewed. And overall, the EU framework is seen as something that is rigorous, but very valuable to be able to navigate. As we said before, EU authorization is really the golden ticket because the EU has a very strong reputation. One of the advantages you can get as well if you get EU authorization is that you can protect your data to a certain level to prevent competitors from reaping off the benefit of your hard work. And again, the earlier you act, regulatory speaking, the better it is for you because you can also save time and money. And novel food is not a death sentence. It can be an in-between scenario. And one thing that is also appreciated by both investor and companies is that you can de-risk the novel food classification at early stages by taking alternative approach. But one thing I would like to emphasize is that authorization for another category or elsewhere doesn't actually replace the need for EU approval when it's mandatory to do so. And in terms of choices that you have in the regulatory framework of the EU, so not only foods, is that we have identified 9 different routes. So we have 5 for human food in the EU. And we will focus on 2 in this presentation, route 1 and 4. And then we also have alternative scenarios in the sense that you can very much sell a novel ingredient before you get approval for foods in pet foods. Or you can also try to seek authorization in foreign jurisdiction. So for these cases, we selected routes 6 and 8. And we will also briefly address the GMO classification in the sense that some jurisdiction, they have a novel food framework or something similar to novel food. And for them, it doesn't matter if the food is actually GM derived. But in Europe, there is a clear distinction, and you cannot apply both the EU at the EU novel food and then the EU GMO classification at the same time. So first off, I would like to kick off with ingredients that actually have a long-standing history of human consumption. And it's very much possible that in terms of due diligence, it can go fast. Because let's say we consider ingredients that are well established, that have been consumed before the landmark dates, and therefore they are not subject to pre-market authorization. And one thing you need to take into consideration is that the food must have been as well eaten to a significant degree. And it's relevant for companies that want to innovate, but also want to avoid the novel foods regulatory framework. Either in the short term or in the long term. And again, the trigger is that you are able to justify that the food has been eaten for a long time. And in terms of timeline to conduct that type of evaluation, it usually takes weeks. So you do the regulatory due diligence either in-house or with a potential expert. You also are able, in this case, to keep your costs low because you don't need that many food safety data to showcase the safety of the product. And the success rate is like quite high because if the food has been consumed for a long time safely, you are able to back this up. You have the basic food safety requirements in place. So let's say like heavy metal residue or pesticide residue like levels for certain products. Your success like rates is like quite high because you do not need to go and see the regulatory authorities. So in terms of advantages, that option enables you to have a fast market entry and also not to dedicate too much capex to this option. But again, make sure that you have a proper reliable source and it doesn't concern new processes and formulation. And just to give you a snapshot, this is how it works. So when you are in that situation, you do not need to check with in that case, it's the national authorities. You do not approach the European Commission or EFSA asking them, can you please maybe check if I'm indeed correct? No, in that case, you only are in contact with the authorities post-market. So once the product is already sold, you might be audited, and the frequency very much depends on the member states. And to showcase the safety of the product, you need a due diligence report, a certificate of analysis, and other safety data. And what you need to look at as well is that the food doesn't appear on the union list or like this union list of sorry. So the reference is that once you have classified your food, you are sure there's not novel, let's say like milk derived products, you will look at the milk related regulation for the EU, and most categories they have a list of products that are approved and how to showcase compliance, so you check them. But it's also very possible that in some cases, the list of proven and safe products is actually maintained by a trade association. So there are two ways to look at it. And again, check that it's properly classified and eaten before the landmark date, that you have all the documentation in place. And if you have any doubt about the potential non-novel food classification, this is when you can go to route 2. And so it's addressed in the report, but not in this presentation, is doing a novel food consultation. So you pick up a member state and then you follow the procedure to have them agree with you that the food is indeed not novel. And for investors, what you need to be aware of is whenever you facing such a case with a company that states that the foods can be sold right away, the type of question you can ask is that if indeed it has been eaten before that time, what is the robustness and also the documentation they have in place to showcase the safety of the products. And one thing as well I would like to emphasize is that if there are like small differences between a product that is like clearly authorized and the version of the company, there are some room for maneuver, but it's very much on a case-by-case basis. And if there are criteria that you cannot bend, it has to match the specification, application, and restriction. And one company that actually adopted this route is called Revive. So they have an interesting case because they started in a novel food space, not being aware that they would actually face some difficulties afterwards. But lucky for them, they actually pivoted from microalgae to yeast for a technical and aesthetic reason, because then you don't need to remove the color, the taste, and overall profile looked after by potential clients is much more appealing. But the way they actually navigated the process is that they partner for the development of their product with a multinational that decided to to conduct a due diligence internal report on showcasing that the food was indeed not novel. So the way we proceeded is by setting up external panel experts, and they looked at the public information in place about the confirmation that the food is not novel by looking at the EU Novel Food Catalogue, which is different from the list of products that have been through a process by being assessed by EFSA and then authorized by the European Commission. It's a living document, the catalogue, and it also compiles some information that you can only find in lists maintained by trade association or that member states have access to, but they don't publish. So lucky for them, then the expert panel confirmed that it was indeed not novel. But to summarize their case, they have faced both challenges and they have been able also to mitigate them. Is that they started happily not knowing the novel foods limitation, and they were actually supported by expert guidance, so that was great. And they were also lucky to choose yeast instead of microalgae. And in order as well to explain the due diligence process, they also have a one-page summary that they can share with clients and also investors. But they are very much aware that the non-novel foods classification, when it comes to innovation, is limited. And in the pipeline, what they know that they might face is that some of the next ingredients they will develop will potentially be novel or even be considered by GMO rules. And they also intend to launch in the US first. So one of the lessons we can learn from this case is that the earlier you address regulatory challenges, the better. Look at the public resources, so the Novel Food Catalogue, to make sure that you won't have any bad surprises later on. That you can also rely on external panel of experts instead of asking EFSA directly. And in terms of the safety of the microorganism, there is also another list that is widely used called QPS, so Qualified Presumption of Safety. And they are also very much aware that the EU, despite being based in the EU, they can also have the freedom to explore other markets because requirements they might be lower, or just depending on the business case that they have. And when you cannot actually avoid novel food, what do? You have to follow route 4, is that you need to submit a novel food dossier. And this is applicable for products that are pretty straightforward. For new foods that has never been eaten in the EU for sure. So if we take, for instance, like cell-based meat, you won't question yourself by arguing, oh yeah, I think it has been eaten before. No, it hasn't, at least not in Europe. And you have to be also very well aware of the implication involved in a novel food classification. Is that based on the interviews we did with the startups involved in the framework, it usually takes between 2 to 5 years to have a product approved by the European Commission. The average is around like 3.8. But they are just like average numbers that very much depends on the complexity of the product. And also sometimes companies, they also involve the preparation time they needed to dedicate before they even submitted the dossier. So be aware that certain studies, like for instance, like toxicological studies, such as the genotoxicity test on rats, is a test that costs 6 figures, and you need 6 months to complete it. But realistically, you have to add on top of that 3 to 6 months to find the proper lab to be able to do the testing for you. And in terms of success rates, We classified it as medium because it's very much depend on the quality of the data submitted. And to be honest, many companies, since they know that it's a long process, they just want to take shortcuts and want to submit the dossier as soon as possible. But the thing is, if it's not complete or poorly drafted, then it decreases the success rate of an average dossier. So there is a paper that is mentioned in the framework from Wageningen University saying that only 20% of the dossiers submitted end up being approved. But again, most of them, they were actually not finished or even like high quality enough to have a chance to be passed. And in terms of advantage, what you can get is 5 years of data protection to give you a temporary market exclusivity. But at the same time, it can be a challenging route, especially for SMEs, because it's quite lengthy and also quite costly. And again, a snapshot of how it works, in a snapshot, is that in that case, to get the authorization to place a novel food on the EU market, you have two entities that are involved. So you have the European Commission that does a validation stage. So they will check if the dossier is complete, that you have data for every parameters they requested. And then when it comes to whether or not it's going to be authorized, it's again the European Commission, but the scientific process is fully handled by EFSA that delivers a safety opinion. So European Commission is a political decision, and EFSA is a purely scientific decision. And in terms of documentation, you need a cover letter, you need a technical dossier that is quite extensive, and also a summary of the dossier. And in terms of milestone, just remember to have a robust safety data generated, and don't be shy and approach EFSA, because there are some pre-submission advice that you can actually get. So don't shy away from that. And in terms of technicality, they are also more mentioned in Annex 2.2 in the framework. And you need also to have a certain plan in place in terms of risk mitigation, because most likely you will get something that is called a clock stop. So this is when EFSA requires more questions from you. So if you have omitted to analyze certain anti-nutrients or certain parameters, like you will have to explain why, and maybe you have anticipated that, and you have actually done some studies, some testing on the side, so it can like speed up the break that is given to you. And overall, on paper, it should take around 17 months from the moment you submit a novel food dossier to the moment it ends up on the union list of novel food. But in practice, it can take 3.8 years. And if you are an investor, what you need to know is that that type of tech, when you think about food tech, sometimes I do diligence for investors. I'm also on the board. Like, I think there is a misconception that food tech is like deep tech. You can go fast as soon as you have a concept. No, it's something that you really need to think through. But at the same time, if you are the first player in the field, you can reap off a lot of benefits. You can get a competitive advantage. And the higher the quality of the dossier is, and then the higher the chances are to have the product assessed smoothly. And again, do not dismiss any companies that come up to you saying that this is only a 17-month timeline. Because it's unlikely to be like this because of clock stops. So it's not on the applicants, it's just the system, how the system work. And also be flexible in terms of how much they ask when it comes to data generation, because sometimes you just never know. So be mindful that the process is not so straightforward, and be ready to adapt yourself to certain situations. And we have another example of a company that went through this, and that is almost ready to go to the market. So that's the Protein Brewery based in the Netherlands, and they develop innovative food ingredients. and they have passed the first stage of the novel food authorization process, in the sense that EFSA deemed that their product was safe. So if we summarize how much it took to arrive to that stage, and also the steps they had in place, is that they applied both in the EU and in the UK. The UK, they are still waiting for the final decision. But in terms of cost and also dossier building, they budgeted for 1 million. Also included some clock stop. And they wanted to be innovative, in the sense that animal testing shouldn't be required for products that do not seek to involve animals. So because the product is non-animal based, but they unfortunately had to do some animal testing. And something also not so, I would say from a legal point of view, was a bit surprising, is like EFSA, when the product was being assessed, they released new guidance that actually applied to the protein brewery retroactively. Like they were already in the process, and then they were slapped with new rules. So you never know. But in terms of lesson learned, is that generate all the required data upfront, because clock stop is not something you can avoid. And recognize as well that the standards are not the same between novel and conventional foods. And what they also did great is to involve both in-house expertise and also external support, to make sure to have a dossier that is like well drafted and will be accepted. And when it comes to not falling into the no food framework, there are other applications. So as I said before, we have pet foods, cosmetic, for instance, like precision fermentation fats can be used in hand cream. So then cosmetic. And you can also very much decide to enter new markets outside of the EU, depending on your business case, or even depending ties with some commercial partners. And another thing as well is that novel food doesn't equal GMO, and the other way around. In Europe, there is a clear distinction, is that a GMO product will not be novel food, and the other way around, because the magic number is that if a product contains more than 10 nanograms per milliliter of detectable modified DNA, this is when you slip into the novel food, the GMO route, and not the novel food anymore. And you cannot cherry pick which one will apply. And one of the examples is the soy legumoglobin that is derived from GM soy with GM yeast. And they wanted to go for novel food, and they ended up having to deal with the GMO framework. And so the way we design also the framework is to make it actionable. So we wanted also to highlight that there are resources that you can make use of. There are some practical tips out there from guidance from EFSA. Be aware as well that legal and political context shape authorization and market access, both in the EU and also outside. And do not think that you have to shoot in the dark, because there is also more help and support available from EFSA with a limited framework. But the more options you are aware of, I think the less scary it is to navigate the novel food process, and you can also feel more empowered in this. And be aware that you have data requirements that you cannot just waive, because they also involve the regulatory expectation. And when you are in doubt, what you need to also look at is like how concepts are defined, what are the key definitions, and if there is any help out there, such as guidance and other resources. So we have everything ready for you in the framework. And I would like to give back the floor for some questions. So yeah, just let me unshare my screen.
Thank you, Mathilde. Yeah, so we'll now open the Q&A session, starting with the questions that were submitted during the presentation, and then we'll take any new questions that come in. I'll try to keep track of them all in real time. Just know if we're not able to get to your question today, or if something comes up after the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at europe@gfi.org, or you can also contact any of us using the contact details that were shown on screen. Just as a reminder, we will share the slides, so you'll have all the info. So let's jump to the questions now. Okay, so Mathilde, someone asked, what is the exact breakdown of the cost of the 1 million euro that you presented for the route for C for novel foods?
So it very much depends on a case-by-case basis, but I would say like the scientific data would represent usually like 50% of your budget. And then lawyers, you're actually not required to have them involved because food law is mostly practiced by non-lawyers, so you can very much decide to partner with scientists or regulatory experts. And they have packages in place most of the time because you need to have regular meetings with them, how to address clock stops and so on. So I wish I could give you more precise number, but like the more documented the novel food is, like the higher chances you will go further away from the 1 million, and then the more complex your product is, and then you will obviously reach out for 1 million or even more.
Thank you. Someone asked if we have any more information on pets. So Muriel sent the link to the framework where you have plenty of information. And if that person has specific questions, please feel free to ask in the Q&A box.
Perhaps a good one is I saw a question on if everybody's cutting corners in submitting their dossier, and that's why it takes a lot of time and often the process is prolonged. How can we make sure we have better dossiers from the get-go?
Use the guidance. There are also been like colloquium organized by EFSA. The last one was 3 years ago on cell-based meats. You can also leverage guidelines that are applied in jurisdiction that has similar rule. But yeah, you have to think for the team. I would say that if you intend to submit a poor quality dossier, you not only shoot yourself in the foot, but also other companies that are going through the same process at the same time, because they will need to dedicate time to you to tell you, well, like we cannot go further because this and that. EFSA needs to justify why the dossier didn't move forward. So whenever you have access to public information, or sometimes even look at the website of the member states where you are located, you have more supports than you think. So yeah, and even sometimes through trade association.
There are two questions regarding other jurisdictions. So the first one is having a GRAS notification. Does it help obtain novel food approval? And what about the other way around?
So the thing with law, it only applies within a certain jurisdiction. If you would recognize what has been approved somewhere else, it's just application of law outside of territories, and also means that you infringe of the sovereignty of the jurisdiction where you're trying to seek approval. And to be honest, like GRAS is recognized as a fast approval process, but it's because the level of due diligence is a bit lower. And when we look around the world, the EU is very much the gold standard. So it won't give you necessarily an edge, but whatever food safety data that you have generated, you might be able to repurpose it for other application, not necessarily the EU. So in any case, when you are seeking authorization in several jurisdictions at the same time, you don't need to start from scratch. And one other thing is that they might ask you if you got approval somewhere else. It's just something they want to know for just their information, but doesn't actually give you a better treatment for companies that didn't go to the US first. And the other way around is that even though the EU has is known as the highest standard, applying in the US with EU authorization is the same. They won't necessarily like waive some of the requirements, but in more, I think, emerging markets, it will be on a case by case basis.
And do you see big differences in the amount needed in different jurisdictions? The 1 million is has a mythical status almost. So
Yeah. For smaller markets, it should be lower. But then I have also like an opposite example for that is like in Switzerland. You don't know how much you have to pay to get the novel food approval, and it's you get a quotation when you submit everything, so you cannot really know in advance how much it's going to cost you. But in the EU, the good thing is that you do not need to pay to have your product assessed. So that's something that please keep in mind that 1 million may seem like a high number, but for instance, in Australia and New Zealand, you can pay for fast track assessment and can I think it's around 250,000 Australian dollar. So yeah. And in terms of reusing like data from one jurisdiction to another, it depends on whether or not they apply the same like testing method. We have had a case in the companies that we interviewed that for some reason they could only reuse 20% of the data they have generated for the US for a EU application. But most likely it's because you have to do the testing in Europe on 5 batches and in the US is 3. But it was also a highly complex product.
Thank you, Mathilde. Someone asked if we have any details on the panel used for by Revive to assess that they were not novel food.
In terms of like the content, it's something that will be kept private, but basically they partner with a company that had the multinational had a lot of experience in this, and it was inspired from how to do a novel food consultation. So route 2, when you don't really know if it's novel or not. And instead of checking with a member state, they decided to follow the same procedure, but only to involve experts and to keep the whole procedure within the company.
We got a question on the BioTech Act that came out last year, the EU BioTech Act. Will it change anything?
So we have to look more in depth in this because I'm very much focused on novel food, but I hope there are some discussion about new genomic techniques, this in between category between GMO and non-GMO. And if there are some categories of new genomic techniques that will require less food safety data, then it will be for the best. But the way the novel food framework is already updated is that EFSA lowered the number of studies that has to be pre-notified. So it's less work for EFSA, but also from the applicant. So it also can help you speed up. And there are more and more meetings between trade association and EFSA and the European Commission how to design a more innovation-friendly framework.
Sorry, Marianne, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, any considerations on gene editing and CRISPR? Would it consider a detectable DNA modification, or could it pass as non-GMO?
It depends how the regulation on GMO is drafted, because some methods are recognized GMO and some others not. And in terms of DNA modification or like how is it detected, it depends on the testing method that you are using. If you use PCR and it's positive, but it don't give you any number, just be aware that the magic number to keep it under novel food framework is 10 nanograms per milliliter. And if you're above, that's not something you can anyway argue your way out. You will be the product will be assessed under the GMO framework and not the novel food one.
We have a question regarding food with a long history of consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if the food has a non-novel food status, but the current conventional process is not publicly available through EFSA, what can one do to confidently guarantee that no significant changes between their processes and the conventional one are in place?
That would be to look into industry databases, or like trade association and so on to see if the product process has been publicly discussed or at least behind a paywall. But for me, that very much sounds like it's route number 2, where you don't really know and you need to dig up a little bit to see what type of information you can find on your own. So might be novel, but might be not. It's very much depends on if you can find anything saying that the product was consumed as such or that it's made in a way that do not modify so much the version that was eaten before the landmark date. So it's very much open to interpretation.
You kind of mentioned it, but can I get advice from the European Commission and or EFSA?
You will only be able to get advice actually from EFSA for the scientific part. You cannot. I have a lot of clients that have tried that. It's like, oh, let me see DG agree or DG something to see if they can agree with my statement and everything. It's like from the moment you have a procedure in place to check the legality of the product, you have to follow it. And EFSA, we have several like tiers of advice you can get. So generic pre-submission advice for more specific food categories and so on. You can also ask them questions via email. They usually answer within 2 weeks. And it's worth a shot because the worst case scenario is that you stay exactly in the same place before asking. And at least if they tell you no, or if they say yes, you can look at the guidance that we have done and so on. At least you have more clarity. But the reason why you won't get like precise and extensive advice from EFSA is because there is a principle of fair treatment. Since it's not something that a lot of companies know for some reason, that you can get advice from EFSA. Like the scope of advice is known, but if EFSA would actually give advice to a company that is outside the scope, then it's considered as unfair competitive advantage. And in that case, it wouldn't be a good outcome because both EFSA and the company will get backlash and also maybe some legal repercussion because you have to treat everybody the same.
Is that different in other jurisdictions?
In other jurisdiction, like the smaller the jurisdiction, like the more extensive is the advice, especially if you don't have a list of publicly approved products. For instance, in Singapore, at the very beginning of the Novel Food Framework, you will be able to have a very productive like advice session. But now it's a little bit less extensive because they had too many applications. But they will be more inclined to tell you maybe that testing method is better than the one you wanted to go for, or check these parameters because it should be lower or higher. So it depends, and you can always try, but likelihood of success is the reasoning is that if a company is told to do something and they don't do it and they try to have the work done by the entity, then you have lower chances to get help from the entity because they don't want to do the work for you.
We have a question, a very specific question. I'm not sure you have the answer to that one. if you seek funding within the framework of research projects by the European Union, can you submit projects for funding in which one of the substances used is obtained by precision fermentation and is currently not authorized as a novel food ingredient?
I think it would most likely refer to the Horizon Europe project, where you have companies like universities and also like a mix of like private and public entities that are involved. But to my knowledge, it wouldn't seem like a fair use if you allow companies to use that funding to get approval. It would be most likely if you try to seek approval as a consortium, then the money could be used to that, used for application and data generation when you are seeking authorization. And each grant has different rules. Maybe the most plausible case is that you are involved in the consortium, but as an external partner, and maybe they do a contest and they decide to allocate some of the funding they got to help a company navigate the process.
If a traditionally processed plant ingredient is labeled as protein rather than flour or seed, could that naming alone influence a novel food assessment, even if the production process itself is not novel?
Yes, because from a regulatory point of view, in terms of labeling, naming, the term protein can be very broad. It can go from flour powder to concentrates, textures, and then isolates. And if you name it in a way that is not in line with the way it's like usually referred in the industry or like scientific paper and so on, you may get novel food questions. It doesn't mean that it will necessarily trigger assessments, but you will have to justify that actually the product has been used for a long time and you just thought that was the proper denomination.
Thank you. So another one, what is the or are there analytical needs in the regulatory journey that are currently not met or frequently raised questions by EFSA? So yeah.
So in terms of like any analytical like needs, would be that let's say you have to test for allergenicity and there is in the guidance some prescribed method, but you decided to go with one that gives you inconclusive results. Then you cannot actually assess if someone, I don't know, is allergic to peanut, might be allergic to your product, because you're not able to establish any cross allergenicity like reaction. Then in that case, you might get a clock stop. And the question raised by EFSA is that it depends also on the design of your dossier. If the way it's drafted, you intend that maybe in some application that might not be safe, but you don't really know, then this is when it triggers like more questions. But as a rule of thumb, there is no dossier out there whatsoever that ever made it without a clock stop. And there is like an administrative reason for that. It's like EFSA is tasked to do an assessment within 9 months. And if they don't do so, then they get a fine by the European Commission or the Court of Justice of the European Union. And to avoid that, they will actually ask the applicants more questions to make sure that they are not going over the 9 months that are allocated. So the 9-month period can be extended several times, and there is also no limit. So one way we could better the framework altogether is by having more people at EFSA and to make sure that they cannot extend the assessment process over and over again.
Thank you, Mathilde. I think you said it during the presentation, but is the list of approved novel foods public?
Yes. So the one that you need to look at, that is the one that has a legal value, is the union list of novel foods. So you will have safety parameters, if the like labeling requirements and so on. in which food categories you can use it. For instance, like inclusion rates in like sport nutrition, like protein bar or like baby food or ice cream and so on. So the union list gives you like a proper overview of anything you need to do regulatory speaking to showcase the safety of the product. But when you don't find the foods that you think is not novel on the union list, it's also worth having a shot at the novel food catalog. But the classification is not legal in the sense that it's a living document. If a novel food on the catalog has not been assessed ever, and then a company come up with a new set of data, the classification can change overnight, be modified by the European Commission. So the union list is your best friend in that case.
And can you briefly re-explain how one company can prevent competitors from selling their novel food?
Yeah. So whenever you apply for a novel food dossier, you will be given the possibility to ask for the confidential protection of your safety data for a period of 5 years. So it's not something that is granted automatically. You have to showcase that since you invested a lot of time and efforts, you should be rewarded from a commercial point of view. And if the European Commission agrees with you, then you get that 5 years protection. And basically, if any companies try to sell the same type of products during that 5 years, you can prevent them to do so. And if you get demands from a lot of companies to actually sell that products, what you can do is also license the production of the ingredients to your competitors. So like this, you can also generate revenues not by producing yourself, but by letting other companies produce your novel food.
And what does it mean if a food is described in the EU novel food status catalog as not novel food, the characteristic ingredient?
So if it's described as not novel food, if I'm not mistaken, there is like six outcome in the novel food catalog. So it means that either there was no need to assess it, so it's like not novel by default, let's say a pineapple or a carrot, or that's based on the information out there for that product that barely anyone is eating, then it's considered not novel based on the current available literature. So you could potentially be safe by using an ingredient that's classified as non-novel in the catalog, but it's better if it's actually an authorized novel food that you see on the list.
If anyone else has a question, please feel free to send them in the Q&A box. Anything specific maybe to your situation, your company. Because we're coming to an end to the questions that we received in the chat.
Maybe I just can pick up one from Olivier about the expensiveness in terms of like 1 million in Singapore, US or UK. So EU and UK will be the same amount because with Brexit, they left with the same set of rules. For the US, it depends if you go through a full GRAS procedure or you stop at the self-GRAS. And then for Singapore, it should be lower. But since we don't have any public data on that, it's very much a question mark. So I would think that in Singapore, it should be lower, but I won't be able to tell you how much lower is it than 1 million.
What would be your number one recommendation to startups in the novel food space?
Be aware that the novel food classification is not something you can avoid if you are going for specific products, like for instance, like cell-based meat, milk, protein made with precision fermentation. But it's not, novel food is not a death sentence. You have alternative strategies that you can consider. And when you are also raising funds, be honest with your investors, because some of them, they would very much appreciate that you first pursue an alternative scenario to be able to build a stronger novel food dossier once the once the time comes.
So what do you think that the novel food regulation space will look like in 5 years? So do you see changes? Do you see progress?
Hopefully, yes. Maybe some of you don't know this, but so the EU Novel Food Framework is harmonized, but member states, they still have some room to actually have some national specificity. It was actually paved by the Netherlands that with the authorization of the government, you can conduct novel food tasting under certain requirements. So like this, it helps you to assess like consumer acceptance and also be more connected with your ecosystem. So I hope this is going to be a EU thing, and is currently also being developed in one region of Spain. And what I really hope to see in 5 years or less is that the timelines reflected in the regulation are actually the one that are applied, because I think it gives a lot of company false hope. If you really think that you can get something approved in 17 months or less. And as well, like in 5 years, we will have for sure like the first cell-based meat products approved. So the path will be tedious and challenging for the first applicants. So thanks to them. And in theory, once EFSA has been through this once, they should be able to assess subsequent application in a much smoother way.
And if a company has already received an approval, can this serve as a guideline for another startup to shift their solution towards something similar to make the approval more easier and more efficient?
Yes, and one thing you can do as well is that it depends if it has been protected for 5 years or not. But let's say you have a competitor that has discovered that your product could be used for other application. What they can do is to request an extension of scope. And it's kind of like mini and fast novel food dossier in the sense you just showcase the differences between the new application you want to have and the one that have been already assessed and approved. So it should be easier for future applicants in that space. But once you get the 5 years protection, you can also prevent a similar company to have a product assessed like faster, because EFSA shouldn't base their assessment on the data they received from you.
Then a question on the data. How does a company have to make it available to EFSA during the process?
So if it's like only for non-novel food status assessment, like EFSA won't be involved at all. But whenever you are submitting a consultation, so it's to a member state, EFSA might be involved if the member state feels like it. But for a dossier, EFSA has guidance, and the dossier also tell you what type of data is needed. So they don't ask you, please tell me how your food is safe. You will have to look at genotoxicity, allergenicity, metabolism of the foods, labeling, potential like uses, like how the product should be stored and everything. So don't worry, you have about more than 10 categories to address in terms of data that you have to provide for. And you have concrete questions that you have to be able to answer. They just won't ask you a generic question, for instance, showcase that it's food safe, because it doesn't mean anything.
But yeah, I'm just rebounding on the question because the question was, how should it be made available in the company?
In the company, within the company, by drafting a due diligence statement. But that's more if potential clients they ask you about why it's not novel, but it won't be to EFSA. There is no EFSA won't actually comment on your safety conclusion in when you do a stated novel food statement, non-novel food statement.
Okay, thank you. I think we're done with the questions, except if anyone has one now. We're almost at the end of our time together, so a huge thank you to Mathilde and Michiel for sharing their insights. Huge thank you to the audience, to your questions, your participation, your attention. As a last reminder, today's seminar has been recorded and will be available soon to you all on YouTube and in your inbox. We added the link to the framework in the chat for those who are interested, so you'll find plenty of complementary information in there and additional resources, so feel free to explore it. Important piece of information, we're also currently in the process of translating the framework into German and Spanish, so those versions will be available very soon as well. To wrap it up, I said it already, but as GFI continues to drive progress in this space, we again genuinely encourage you to share your ideas, your feedback, questions with us. So please feel free to reach out directly to any of us three or to europe@gfi.org, and we'll be happy to help. Can you send the link again? Can we? Yes, we'll send the link to the framework again.
We also share the slides, right? And we share the framework there as well.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, once again, and enjoy the rest of your day or your evening.